Thank you, everyone, for joining. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this month's Tech Talk with Pratik. I'm thrilled to be your host today as we explore modern cloud solutions that are shaping the future of the data center. In a world where digital transformation, I think you probably hear that, that term you thrown around a lot, but it's no longer an option, but a necessity. We have, there we go. So like I said, it's no longer an option, but really a necessity. And what I'm seeing in the market today is that businesses are really struggling with the challenges of seamlessly integrating on-prem infrastructure with the capabilities of the cloud. This is where the concept of hybrid and multi-cloud solutions really comes into play. It's a strategic approach that really empowers businesses to harness the strength of both on-premises and cloud environments, resulting in improved flexibility, scalability, and efficiency. Our spotlight today shines on Microsoft Azure Stack HCI, a revolutionary HCI or hyperconverged infrastructure solution that brings both the ease of Windows Server, the agility of hyperconvergence, and the power of Azure services. In fact, my channel partners say that it's a game changer for businesses really seeking to modernize their data centers, streamline operations, and really pave the way for a cloud-native future. We'll also be touching on Azure Stack Hub, another resource in their cloud arsenal. Azure Stack Hub extends Azure services to customers' environments, allowing them to really create and manage applications consistently across cloud boundaries. It's like having a slice of Azure right in the data center, enabling them to really meet regulatory requirements, address latency concerns, and maintain full control over sensitive data, all really while enjoying the benefits of Azure's innovation for all workloads, wherever they reside. Throughout our time today, we'll be exploring the key components, benefits, and real-world applications of these solutions. But wait, this isn't really a one-way street, and so I encourage each one of you to ask questions and interact in the discussion. This webinar is your opportunity to gain insights, clear your doubts, and walk away with a deeper understanding of hybrid and multi-cloud landscape. So I say, welcome to the future of cloud technology. And to help make sense of it all, I brought an expert who truly is a one-man show, as he possesses expertise in both Microsoft and Lenovo. Everyone, let's welcome Phil Silas, a solutions architect with Lenovo. Phil, thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little about yourself and your role?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Great to be here with everyone here today. As Pratik said, my name is Phil Searles. I work for Lenovo. I'm what we call a solutions architect. I've been with Lenovo about 10 years. Before that, I was with IBM for started my career for about 31 years. So I've been around the corner a bit. Started at mainframes, done every platform through IBM and OS. And basically the same here in Lenovo. So seen a lot, been working with a lot of customers. Currently today, I work in our global accounts area. I focus on 3 key large global customers. And not that Microsoft solutions are a key part of my day-to-day work. They do come up quite often. In my prior roles in Lenovo, I have supported the Microsoft solutions with our North American and global field. And that's where most of my knowledge comes from. So I've worked with all this Hub and HCI, done it, been there, got the t-shirt, still around. Okay. So looking forward to working with you today and talking with you today. And Pratik, we can get started when you're ready.
Perfect. Yep. Thank you, Phil. So I just want to mention that, hey, I butchered his last name. I think I'm consistent every month so far, so I just don't want to break that record. Sorry, Phil.
No worries.
Everyone, please use the chat window for all your questions and comments. So let's get started. Phil, could you start out with kind of help us really understand the Azure Stack portfolio, plus really like how it differs from other cloud solutions and what unique advantages it really brings to the table.
Sure, be happy to. So as you mentioned already, there's 2 fundamental software offerings for Microsoft in the cloud computing model of today. Apart from the Azure public cloud, which I'm sure everybody is fully aware of, Microsoft has a specific offering and has had it since back in 2017 called Azure Stack Hub. Well, actually, back in 2017, it was called Azure Stack. It wasn't until they came out with their hyperconverged platform that it got renamed to Azure Stack Hub.
Oh, there we go.
Um,
There we go.
Azure Stack Hub,
Now pull up your presentation and share.
do we want to just quiet down that background noise?
Yeah.
There we go.
So,
Good.
yeah, we'll take care of that. Sorry, we're looking into,
Yeah, no problem. So from a Hub point of view, Hub's been around since about 2017. Its intent was to provide a pure private cloud offering for customers on-prem. So what Microsoft literally did was take the public Azure cloud, cut off a chunk which seemed to fit what enterprise customers may want to do on-prem, reworked it to fit within a x86 server platform cluster, and that became Azure Stack Hub. So it was a revolutionary concept back then. It was as one of a kind because it was true private cloud. It was the cloud on-prem. There were a few other platforms which claimed to be private cloud, but they were just various forms of virtualization with a self-service interface in front of it. This really was the cloud. As it evolved over the past 8 years, Hub is still an opportunity, a technology which customers look to acquire, but specifically it tends to focus on people who need to do native Azure cloud application support on-prem for governance reasons, for cost reasons, for other business or corporate rationality. They want to do those apps, those Azure technologies on-prem. Azure Stack Hub actually runs as a separate region, just like every Azure region is. They're all independent regions. So one of the things you tend to see with Hub is large clients are the ones that use this. Operating your own private cloud is a complex and involved process. So you have to know a lot about Azure to do Azure Stack Hub well. So you typically see this in large customers, right? Hub's still available today. It is not a hugely growing environment, but where it fits, it does an excellent job. The other solution, which came out between 2017 and 2019, was what we call Azure Stack HCI. At the original point of introduction, it was actually WSSD, but it's basically it started as Windows Server Data Center, failover cluster, but with an evolution of the storage spaces technology that was available in Windows Server to provide a within server virtual storage pool, right? So this was software-defined data center, all in an x86 server cluster, not requiring anything else outside to do all the virtualized hypervisor functions that you would ever want, right? Including storage. About 2019, it got rebranded as Azure Stack HCI, and that's when they rebranded Azure Stack to Azure Stack Hub, on the premise that Microsoft wanted to start this concept of true hybrid workload connectivity between Azure Cloud, on-prem hyperconverged, on-prem hub where required, and also to a greater extent, other general server and client platforms. So they were trying to start the building of the true hybrid cloud globally and ubiquitously. So really what makes HCI and Hub unique is this architected hybrid world. There are lots of platforms out there, work with them all, or a lot of them anyways. They are, a handoff process, or they are run something within something else. So take a virtualized technology today, run it virtualized inside the cloud, and provide a network connectivity between them. It looks like 2 on-prem clusters. There you go. So there's lots of ways of doing this, but Microsoft has actually architected and is continuing to architect the Azure Stack family of solutions with their Azure cloud to provide a architected and integrated technology suite. Key point to remember at this point is it's an evolving process. So what Azure Stack HCI was 2 years ago to what it was a year ago to what it is today to what it will be years to come is an ever-changing aspect. So, and it has definitely been improved a lot over the past couple of years.
Right. Yeah, I think what is the difference between the Azure Stack HCI and the Hub is probably a common question I get all the time from my partners. So yeah, I really appreciate, starting out with that. But,
And 99 times out of 100, the solution will be HCI, not Hub. Hub is definitely a 1 out of 100 type opportunity, but it's good to have that opportunity in the portfolio.
oh, definitely. So talking about, having that in the portfolio, I know Lenovo actually has that Think Agile MX, which is really designed to complement Azure Stack HCI, as well as the Think Agile SXM or the Azure Stack Hub. So, could you elaborate on the features of these Think Agile solutions and really, what are they doing that can really enhance the performance and scalability of Azure infrastructure?
Absolutely, love to. So if we look at SXM once again, which is the Azure Stack Hub Solutions platform, basically, if you're involved with Lenovo or any of our peers, really, all these solutions are built off of our mainstream server technology. So both SXM and MX, the Hub and HCI solutions, are all based primarily off of our SR650 2U high server or our SR630 1U high server. That's the core of both of these from a platform point of view. But what we do as part of the solution offering, especially with SXM for the Hub environment, Hub is a extremely integrated rack scale solution. At the time when it was available, there were only 3 OEMs that had a SXM offering because you had to be specially certified. The technology and your deployment and your construction had to be validated and certified by Microsoft. You had to have special processes and procedures to actually deploy these. They were built as a turnkey white glove deployment of a working solution as it got deployed. So it was an extensive activity. So obviously we did all that leveraging all our own technology. We initially started doing it with our own switches. We had to migrate to other switches at some point, but still it's provided as a complete rack scale solution, which is what makes SXM unique and interesting, especially within the Lenovo portfolio. Along with that, there is a firmware best recipe, which is tied to Microsoft's releases of solution OS code and feature code for Azure Stack Hub. So one of the challenges we've always had in IT is matching OS upgrades with firmware upgrades, not just the OS, but all the NIC cards and drives and everything else, right? Along with switches. So all this has to be tied together. So as we look at SXM and MX and all of the rest of the Think Agile solution offerings that Lenovo provides, these are all based off of what we call integrated best recipes. So as we work with the supplier of the solution, Microsoft in this case, as they're about to release a new OS version, we co-test updated firmware to work with that OS version. So as the customer wants to upgrade to the next level, they can also upgrade to firmware, and those two are known to work together. Along with that, we built special support lines for defect support. So if you call this number and you say, I have a SXM rack, they actually know what it is. They know how to deal with the solution. They have direct line of support and help and cooperation with Microsoft in this case to resolve any solution issues. So we hand problems back and forth between us and Microsoft for both these offerings, right? So make sure it's delivered right the first time. Our engineers optimize the hardware selection for performance, for effectiveness and efficiency, also for working with the solutions provider, Microsoft, to make sure they agree and support that as well. So we're actually working with them on a strategic basis to make sure we are deploying and building these things in the most strategic way possible, given what the strategies of product development are going forward. So there's a lot of thought that goes behind all this stuff. And that's why they're such great solutions. MX, again, is the HCI-focused solution, not the hub-focused one. The big difference between MX and SXM is MX is a per-node solution. So you're not buying rack scale, you're buying a node or 2 nodes or 4 nodes or whatever. We offer them both as what we would call certified node, which is just the hardware and firmware best recipe, or as an integrated system, which is including the Azure Stack HCI OS. The reason we do this, a couple of reasons. The primary one is, if you remember, I said Azure Stack HCI first came out as part of Windows Server Data Center. You can still run the what I would call non-Azure aligned HCI on Windows Server Data Center. So the customers we have who are not at the point where they want to align their HCI platform to Azure will actually get the certified nodes because it's certified hardware for the solution and run Windows Server Data Center on it in a hyper-converged infrastructure configuration. And they just leverage the same certified hardware and firmware that the Azure Stack HCI OS environment runs, right? When they came out with Azure Stack HCI, they actually took the Windows Server OS development code and took a thread off of that, stripping off a bunch of the GUI and extra components to make it targeted just for HCI, and then targeted to support all the Azure integration requirements as well. And that's why there's a difference there. We also do have, just for reference, in the Microsoft catalog, our MX offerings, the various platforms and model names, and there's a variety of them. We also have non-MX Azure Stack HCI certified hardware. The reality is what we have branded as MX are the volume core data center scale offering. But obviously, there are lots of unique situations out there in the industry. So we have specifically validated, although not branded, other platforms in our portfolio to meet and address specific customer needs when it comes to Azure Stack HCI. So we have some smaller data center type technology, but the most interesting thing is our edge technology. So if you're aware of our SE Think Edge brand of servers, so the SE 350, the SE 450, the 350 is actually an MX branded offering, but the bigger brother 450 is one of these catalog validated platforms for a larger edge offering. So there's a lot of that going on. So when you think Azure Stack HCI, the go-to is an MX branded offering, but keep in mind there are other non-MX branded offerings. There are some implications with using them, but they do provide a great deal of flexibility. Does that help?
Oh, perfect. So actually, I have a timely question that came into the chat. So can you elaborate on the security benefits that are with the Azure Stack HCI? So like, for example, do security update get automatically pushed to HCI on-prem VMs at a similar cadence as the cloud VMs?
So you can enable that. So when you put in the Azure Stack HCI, you can have it run and do a security governance from your Azure tenant security governance model and policies. So they can be pushed and implemented down to Azure Stack HCI. Azure Stack HCI also has its base Windows security update process specific to that platform. On top of that, running within an Azure platform like Azure Cloud or Azure Stack HCI, customers who are running things like outdated versions of Windows Server or SQL can actually run on Azure Stack HCI in a virtualized VM and get security updates from a VM point of view for those platforms ongoing. So you can still get security updates and support either in Azure or in Azure Stack HCI or Azure Stack Hub for that matter. So the whole Azure Stack environment supports what they call ESU.
So there was one additional question, really talked about like a cost for the starting point, but I know there is geo registration, a lot of other factors that go into pricing. But let me twist that question around a little bit to ask in a different way. Is there a minimum number of nodes that are needed for a MX versus a SXM that you could speak to?
Sure. So SXM is a specific solution cluster, so it has to have at least 4 nodes to start, scales to a maximum of 16 nodes. All nodes in that cluster have to be exactly the same, and that's a system designed for performance and scalability question. So that's SXM. MX can run from a single node up to 16 nodes in a cluster. That's a performance statement more than anything else. The nodes in MX as well are required to be homogeneous nodes. Now, quite honestly, some people go, what do you mean all my nodes have to be the same? I may want some more storage-rich nodes, some less storage-rich nodes, because I want that flexibility. So the MX HCI answer is have multiple clusters. The reason why we do homogeneous nodes is so that whether your workload's running on node 1, node 3, node 2, node 5, node 10, the resources, the performance, the latency delays are exactly the same no matter where you are running. From a storage point of view, unlike most all the other platforms, in fact, all the other platforms, storage in Azure Stack HCI is evenly spread based on resiliency and compression factors evenly across all the drives, across all the nodes in the cluster, and it's maintained that way. So once again, no matter where your VM runs, it'll always get the same I/O and performance no matter where it's running.
Okay.
Now, give an example of this. You do this, they have done benchmarks before where they've run a 12-node MX cluster running SQL, benchmarked to push as many transactions through as possible. The interesting thing with this solution is they were getting about 900,000 IOPS per node. So, and they started with, I think it was 12 nodes, they're getting 11 million IOPS, right? And as they started adding more nodes, the IOP rate per node actually went up. And it scaled linearly. So as they went through, they basically gained 1 million IOPS of SQL performance every node they added. And that's because the system is designed in a scalable manner, right? And a linear performance model to go along with that.
Perfect. So, I don't, since what we've, what we've discussed so far, what I'm thinking is for businesses considering hybrid cloud approach, what are some of those critical factors that they should consider when really choosing between on-prem solutions or, public cloud services?
Great question. Great question. So basically, there's 5 broad categories. Some of them are obvious. The first one really gets down to data governance. Where do you need the data to be? Now, for many customers, it doesn't matter where it is. It's a cost access or some other decision. But in many cases, there are corporate or regional country requirements for where government data is stored and how it's handled. So you need to keep that in mind. And that may flip you one way or the other. It's an easy thing to go through. The next one's a little more challenging, but still critically important, and that's workload latency. So all electricity travels at the same speed. So if you want something to happen in the cloud versus where you are to a server in your building or down the road, the time it takes electricity to arrive is different. And that latency can impact some workloads in a very disastrous way. Other workloads don't care. You look at Netflix, they stream videos, you think, wow, that must take a lot of bandwidth and whatever. No, because they buffered all the way across. They're not worried about latency, they're just worried about throughput. But most business applications are interactive, so latency becomes key, and latency adds up. So everything that incurs latency causes application performance problems. So that may, if you are latency sensitive, you typically want on premise. If you're not, the cloud is a great place. Third item is workload scale and scope. So how big is it? If you want to run a multi-petabyte data lake that you're going to use, running a data lake of storage on-prem can get very costly and very hard to manage. Often it's easier to do that in the cloud. And if you're not actually moving it around a lot, it can be a very cost-effective solution. If you have access points across the globe, then obviously, once again, for the latency point of the question, you want to spread your applications all over the globe so they are local and as close to the users of those applications and data as possible, right? So depending scale and scope, that's one key item. The fourth one, obviously, cost and skills, right? Public cloud, any public cloud, when you actually look at the cost versus on-prem, there are significant costs running in the public cloud, right? Like everybody else, they play with the prices, they do all kinds of things, but in the end, it does cost real money to run there. And depending on what you're doing, it can be less costly to run on-prem. It can cost more to run on-prem, so you need to look at all the aspects and the costs involved with what you're trying to do to make the decision as to, from a cost point of view, where's the best place to run a workload. And this is the key thing about hybrid is it's not should I be in the cloud or should I be on-prem? It's really what should be in the cloud and what should be on-prem. And all these points kind of decide how you make that decision. The last item, and it's kind of an overall thing, is just manageability, right? Can you manage what you need to manage, where it is, and how you want to manage it? It's all good to have things run, but we need to be able to manage IT because if we don't, it'll get out of control. There you go.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So I know you kind of touched on this a little bit. So, but could you share some like real world examples of Azure Stack HCI and Think Azure MX implementation? Something that can give us an idea of what the capability.
Yeah, so one thing quickly, I mentioned this whole SQL database example benchmark that was done. At the very beginning of all this, one of my first big opportunities I was involved in was to do with a large SAN storage pool, which was costing the customer a fortune, and like in the petabytes of storage. And that got replaced by a Azure Stack HCI solution. And it cost them far less than the SAN did, and it performed far better than the SAN ever did. So that was a really eye-opening experience right down at the beginning, and that hasn't changed any over the years. The other big thing I see with customers a lot is there is a segment of customers which currently use other very name brand and known hypervisors who are getting concerned about the costs of that infrastructure, right? Many of those customers do not get the value that potentially that other hypervisor environment or cloud environment can provide. So, but they're paying the bill for it. So there are, in many cases, significant cost differences moving from other platforms to Azure Stack HCI. There are reasons to do the move, reasons not to do it. As I said before, one of the reasons to do a move and where to place workload is cost. Where you are in any of this, cost and skill is a key component, right? One of the nice side benefits of this whole Microsoft Azure Stack and Azure solution is much of the skill is consistent. If you know Windows Server and if you know Azure as a tenant, Azure Stack HCI and all these other activities within Azure are just incremental skills on top of what you already know. If you're running SQL, if you're running Windows Client, if you're running Office, if you're running any of these things, all the suite of software and capabilities that Microsoft has tend to integrate easier than taking a bunch of different products from different vendors and different coding structures, trying to make them work on a single platform. So that's one place where we've seen a lot of benefit as well. The big thing these days, though, really is edge. The edge is exploding out there. So with advent of AI and even before AI, just the enhancing the technological capabilities at the edge for business management, logistics, all these things. Edge, along with IoT as a side point, is providing huge growth. The problem is edge needs capability. It needs to be robust. It needs to be available. It needs to be manageable. And, we've had a number of customers right now going from, people have like 10 stores or edge points or retail outlets or whatever to hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of endpoints. And a lot of it is great. How do you deploy? How do you monitor? How do you manage? How do you update? How do you maintain all this stuff? And when you look at the Azure ecosystem with Azure Stack HCI and the edge, most all the core pieces are there to run, manage an at-scale edge compute platform. And if it's AI, great, you need edge boxes that support GPUs and such. If it's not AI, then you need this. Sometimes you need smaller boxes, sometimes you need bigger, but the concept of having a significant edge support technology is key. And with the fact that you can take a Azure Stack HCI platform cluster and run it as a single node is unique. So you can start with one or do two. We typically recommend two because hardware does break, unfortunately. So you have higher HA with two, but with the single node option, the recovery point is the Azure cloud. So as long as you don't lose your internet connection and you lose your node, you can still function potentially, depending how you set up the environment. Those are the three key areas I would see, people seeing value in doing work in the hybrid converged environment for Azure Stack right now.
Yeah, so I understand that really integrating between the multiple cloud environments really can be complex. So then how does Azure Stack HCI really facilitate that seamless integration between on-prem and the cloud? And what are some of those challenges that businesses might be encountered during the process?
Sure, great question. So as I said earlier, Azure HCI and the Azure cloud are different technologies. But I also said that Microsoft's working to integrate them from a hybrid point of view. One of the key technologies they're using to do this is a capability called Azure Arc. So Azure Arc is a feature capability within the Azure cloud. And Azure Arc is to be the integration point for all Azure to non-Azure entities. So the first one was Windows Server, just to do some monitoring of Windows Server VMs. But the key one came along was Azure Stack HCI. So what they did with Azure and Azure Stack HCI to make it a little more unique is one, if you know Azure, they created an Azure Resource Manager, an ARM, to represent an Azure Stack HCI cluster. So now if you're in an Azure tenant and you're looking at all the resources you have to your disposal in Azure, if you have Azure Stack HCI, those resources will be available and usable from an operational point of view in Azure, right? And there's a lot of neat automation things you can do based on that. Back quickly on topic, so Azure Arc. So what Azure Arc does, Azure Arc will install an agent as part of your Azure Stack HCI environment, and you'll get an agent on every single node. That agent allows the Azure Stack HCI environment to talk to your Azure tenant environment directly, and for your tenant to work with your HCI environment. So once again, Arc will allow you to see all the HCI clusters you have connected to your tenant. Arc will allow you to see all the workloads running on your tenant. Arc will allow you to actually start and stop those workloads. Arc will allow you to, in the very near future, move those workloads from the HCI environment to Azure and back again, right? If you move into the Kubernetes environment, the whole Kubernetes environment becomes part of Azure Arc as well. So Arc, if you run Azure Kubernetes services on the HCI environment, and you're running AKS on the cloud, Arc provides communication funneling between those two environments. So you can run a single Kubernetes type environment. So Arc is this key aspect. The other nice thing about Arc is it understands that there's more than the world, just more to the world than just Microsoft. So it actually connects to things like GCP, the Google Cloud. It connects to AWS. So a customer now can use Arc to manage their resources within Azure, and then also, to a degree, manage resources in these other major public clouds. Now, is it the same complete capabilities and feel and function? No, but it provides a level of connectivity, management control, and most importantly, visibility to what's going on. They also have an Azure Arc client for VMware. So if you have a VMware cluster, you can now monitor and to some limited extent manage a VMware cluster as well. So a lot of our customers are looking to go from, say, VMware to HCI. They'll be running VMware, they'll start building clusters, and with the Arc environment, they can have visibility to both sides, right, as they transition over. So, all these things, this function is there to provide integration. It is the foundation of the growth of their integration capabilities. In the end, the goal obviously is to provide seamless integration between all the aspects of the Azure ecosystem and other key ecosystems as well, to provide a heterogeneous environment where the Azure tenant you have will be the focal point for the management and control of your enterprise infrastructure.
Perfect. So yeah, I love that integration part because that's where my ease of use comes in, comes into play. I love that. I love that concept. But let's switch gears a little bit. I've read an article about Lenovo's commitment to sustainability. So then I'm just going to ask just a direct question, really. How does the Think Agile portfolio align with the sustainability initiatives, and really, how can businesses leverage this in their own decision making?
Excellent question. Excellent. Yeah, sustainability is a big issue these days in the industry in the world. So Lenovo's doing everything it can. Some of the things, many of the things that we're doing for sustainability, the customer will not see, nobody's going to see, but we do a lot to make sure that the way we design, the way we're building, the way we do our supply chain, whether we're using ships or planes and what routes they're taking, we're trying to do everything we can from a business point of view to operate in a more sustainable environment and get to that net zero concept as quickly as possible, right? So, but a lot of that you don't actually see. In cases where we are shipping numbers of boxes, we're doing a lot to do bulk packaging more sustainable, not having a lot of extra stuff. You'll see, customers do see today on our commercial side, we're packaging consumer products with no plastic. They're all, recycled wood kind of componentry and cardboards.
I think we lost your voice there.
Yeah. It got
Sorry.
muted.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
I'm back. Sorry. So carbon offset. So we do offer carbon offsets with our servers, and you can use that for customers can use that for their carbon credits, for their carbon costs as you go forward. The other cool thing where you'll start to see in some of the latest MX boxes is enhanced cooling technologies. And although today they're not the biggest hitters, we have a cooling brand called Neptune within Lenovo. We are doing a lot with this brand to improve and maximize the cooling capability of servers. Why do we care from a sustainability point of view? The very simplest thing is this. If you look at any server, including MX, of all the power consumed, about a quarter to a third of that is consumed by the fans pulling heat out of the server. Now, with proper cooling technologies, we can reduce that dramatically. In fact, today in our densest SD650 servers that are like one-use slide-in kind of chassis servers, those servers are completely water-cooled. We remove 98% of the heat with liquid cooling, and there are no fans in those servers, which now means that your server that took whatever number you want, 2,000 watts of power, is now only consuming 1,500 watts of power or 1,200 watts of power. And by the way, those customers who really care will take the water, the heat that's removed within this cooling system, plug that into their building heat, and use that heat to heat their building. So a lot of cool things happening there. We will see enhanced cooling technologies with MX as we move forward. But today we have a better liquid cooling unit for the high-end processors, but other things are coming as well. And lastly, obviously, getting rid of old technology is a potential challenge for some customers. We do have asset recovery services we provide for customers to, help them move technology out and get new technology in, and we'll make sure as part of our process that the technologies get reused, recycled as efficiently as possible in the back end, or reused for schools or whatever, other charity organizations.
Okay. So there was a question that came in about Azure Stack backup options. Could you speak to that, as in what the
Azure Stack HCI or Azure Stack Up? So let's do HCI because it's probably more appropriate. So it gets down to a couple of things. You can use within reason any classic backup technology you have. You're running Veeam or Commvault or whatever. Yeah, you can run it to manage the backup, the VMs and stuff within your environment. If you're looking at the platform itself, once again, you can use those traditional backup methodologies, but you can also leverage the either the Azure technologies. So Azure has an Azure Site Recovery technology, which you can use if you set up for all your VMs and have them recover into the cloud with all the appropriate IP address changes and everything else. You can obviously also use technologies such as the Hyper-V based technologies for storage replication or VM replication, if you want to use that as a real-time backup technology as well. So there's a number of options there. The net is, it's basically Windows Server and Azure. So what works for Windows Server will mostly work for Azure Stack HCI because they're fundamentally exactly the same thing, right? This is one of the really neat things about this. There's nothing new. There's nothing really that different. It's Windows Server. If you know Windows Server, you got some new things to learn, but the core of the technology is the core of this technology, right? Azure is a little different, but once again, it's Azure. So whether I'm backing up a VM from a Windows Server platform, from a Linux environment, from a VMware environment, and using Azure Site Recovery to recover it, it's Azure Site Recovery. That's what it does, right? So you're just leveraging what's already existing. I know there are some backup providers who are trying to specifically focus on optimal ways to back up in a HCI, Azure Stack HCI aware environment, and that is coming out or coming along quickly. But yeah, fundamentally, what you have today will work.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that. So we kind of talked about scalable, sustainability. I'll keep with the letter S and go with scalability. Scalability is a critical factor for businesses, especially for those that have aspirations for growth. So how does the combined solution of Azure Stack HCI and Think Agile MX really support that seamless scalability to accommodate that that evolving need?
Great question. So so from our perspective, we look at scalability from a few aspects. Obviously, you have to start with at least one node. When we build nodes, you can build and design a node one of two ways. You can build a node to the spec you want. So you fill all the bays, you fill all the memory, you fill the processor to what's required, and there you go. And as you scale, you add more nodes in homogeneous increments per node. The other way is you can build a node with capacity to scale into, right? So in most cases, my personal preference is to build nodes that you can scale up, right? A node scale up. So I don't fill all the memory slots. I don't fill all the drive bays. Processors, leave them be. You can change them, but it's not a nice thing to do. But storage is typically your problem. So typically I'll build them with half the bays empty. So customers down the road, because storage is the most unpredictable growth part of any IT environment. So at least if they go, oh, I need some more storage really quick, they can go buy some more drives of the same kind, the same size, same technology, put them into all the nodes in a homogeneous structure. So the same number of drives end up being in every node, and you can upgrade. And you can keep doing that until you fill the drive base, right? You don't have to, but you can, right? If you then said, fine, I now see a large growth coming where I need memory and processor as well, then you add nodes. So from a HCI point of view, your minimum is 1, your maximum is 16 in a cluster. Okay. If you need more than 16 in a cluster, have multiple clusters. And in fact, Microsoft has this interesting cluster set concept where if you actually have a strategic plan to how you name all the domains that these clusters run in, you can create a cluster set namespace above everything else. So now you can actually do migrations from one cluster to another cluster very easily. And you can access storage from another cluster very easily because you have a common namespace within which to work. So there's some really neat things you can do. So whether it's a node to a cluster to multiple clusters to cluster sets, you can scale these things up to be really large environments and, involved as much as you want, right? Then your other option obviously is hybrid to the cloud, right? So you can go to the Azure cloud quite easily and come back again from there.
So then, with that said, I have many channel partners that have their end users that are already invested in traditional data center infrastructure. Yeah, how can they transition to a hybrid cloud model without really disrupting their existing operations?
So yeah, that's interesting. And once again, it always depends on where you're starting and where you're trying to get to, right? So if the get to is Azure Stack HCI and the Azure cloud in a hybrid configuration, obviously, when you look at most all of IT, there are primarily 2 OSs that run everything: a Linux OS variant and a Windows Server level. There are a few other OSs I'm aware of that people are running other than some IBM really bizarre things, which are not covered by this. So the reality is this, as I said at the beginning, Azure Stack HCI is Windows Server failover cluster with this S2D storage spaces direct virtualized storage technology. So if a customer wants to start moving or a partner wants to start moving, you look at, okay, understanding what the base HCI cluster is. HCI will support Windows and Linux clients, VMs. So you can start looking at whatever the customer has and migrating VM by VM from one platform to the other. In most cases, whether it's a virtualized Linux VM or another hypervisor's Windows VM, mostly the containers that hold VMs are unique as far as the wrapper around them, but the content of any virtual machine is the same to a greater extent. So other than some of the bizarre the complexities of interrelated VMs and databases, you can take those VMs, change the wrappers, move it over. Most backup programs will do that for you very easily, and you can start to move workloads over. Connecting your HCI environment to the cloud is a fairly straightforward process. It's part of the installation process to start with, and then just how much you use is how much you use. But yeah, it's basically it's just you have to work with it. The nice thing is the new cluster is basically Windows Server from a support point of view, and there's lots of people who know Windows Server. Now, don't let me oversimplify. Azure Stack HCI is a complicated platform. There's a lot of intricacies. There's a lot of really complicated technology in here, like everything else out there as well. But it is all based on Windows Server and the PowerShells, the interfaces, the toolings, the baselines are basically Windows Server, right? Azure is a cloud, and there's lots of people out there with Azure skill and experience. It's one of the top 2. I think Amazon and Azure are still fighting it out. But basically, there's lots of people using Azure. There's lots of consultants and business partners supporting Azure environments. So there's lots of skill out there to work with that, right? Migration is the hardest part of all of this, right? And migration is a specific skill, and you really need to understand the workloads involved, but you can migrate from anything to anything. The question is, what's the process to do it? So the destination is straightforward, right? Where you're coming from is where you're coming from. Building skills, you already have skills here, obviously. Building these skills, you either have them already or they'll be fairly straightforward to acquire. So that should be fairly straightforward.
Perfect. In the comment section, I see it says great conversation. So I know when to quit one in my head. So what I'll do is I'll ask one final question here. Really, looking ahead, how do you envision the future of cloud computing evolving in response to, today's changing market demand?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So none of us can really predict the future. I've been around long enough and been wrong enough that maybe just ignore this part of the answer because I don't know, or I really can't predict. But from my perspective, you know, it was interesting during the start of public cloud. Everybody wanted to go to the cloud. Everybody was doing, let's go to the cloud, move everything to the cloud. And that was like 2, 3, 4 years. And then after that, you saw the way people going, let's get out of the cloud. It costs too much. It costs too much to get out of the cloud. The key point with the whole thing is customers realize that two things. One, they don't want to deal with IT. Two, having somebody else deal with IT for you costs more, right? And overall this, they have a business to run, which isn't typically running IT. So when I talk to customers, I find typically their focus is, I have a business to run. I'm using IT to do something, achieve something in my business. So that's what they want to focus on. What's behind is something they'd rather avoid, right? But they know because of cost, they have to have some level of involvement in it to take care of it. So what I find powerful is that's not going to change. I don't see any reason why it would change. So what all the IT behind running business technology needs to be simpler, more dynamic, less involved, so customers can just carry on with their business, right? So it gets down to when I look at presenting, positioning technology for any customer, big or small, my first concept is this needs to be as simple for them to operate and manage and deal with as possible, right? So they can focus on their business, right? And whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, it should be what it is based on what's the easiest, simplest place for it to be, right? And, and then the next point is cost, right? It all comes at businesses are all about cost. I don't blame them. Their job is to maximize profits. So you want to be as low cost, as low maintenance, as low workload as possible for the customer that meets their business needs, right? That's where I see it going. Where I don't see it going is where we came from. I remember I started with mainframes. So we used to build everything from scratch. I called it the Lego block strategy. We would take bits and pieces from all over the place and build something unique and special. I was part of the generation which we made IT, right? We custom built everything. And that was what IBM was best at, was custom build, right? You custom build it. And they were works of art, but they cost a fortune. And they were tough to maintain and manage and grow, and they didn't scale. And you had huge IT departments supporting it, right? Today, it's more of that consumer, consumption methodology. I just want to use it and get going, right? At a high level, yes, I see that's where we're going to be. At a detail level, you need a solution which does as much of that possible today and scales into that better going in the future, right? At this point, given the scope, scale, and reach of Microsoft, I think they have the most effective long-term plan, right? Because they have such a breadth of coverage right now. But we will see.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Phil. That was very informative. I got really great comments in there. tell me about, all the different things that everybody learned today. So what I want to do is just kind of do a quick recap. We explored the pivotal roles that Microsoft's Azure portfolio really plays in shaping this diverse landscape. But you have to remember the cloud revolution. The cloud, when I say the cloud, I mean hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, distributed cloud. We kind of, we talked about edge. So, distributed cloud is right in the mixes there. It's really an ongoing process. So it's not as, oh, you've missed a boat or that, okay, it's too late. It's still ongoing. So what I see is that, with Microsoft Azure solutions, you're really armed with those tools to lead that charge. And, I'm not really sure who said this, but it seems appropriate for our digital age. The future belongs to those who dare to embrace change and harness the power of technology to drive their vision forward. So that's all I can say. I think those are probably the best words I can leave you with. So on behalf of my distinguished guest, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to everyone for joining us today. What I heard this week, I'm going to use again. I'm going to actually steal that thing, but it says, stay curious, stay innovative, and stay connected. Thank you, everyone. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.